We've heard from commissioners, we've heard from fans, we've heard from reporters, and we've heard from journalists. Now we get to hear a legendary Hall of Fame coach's opinion on the Clemson and FSU realignment going on.
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Clemson podcast. We are so glad that you're here. My name is John Bivens. I am your host, bringing you this episode. You can follow us over on Twitter or X at I am John Bivens. You can follow us over on there. We are a credentialed media member for Clemson, credentialed in football, baseball, basketball, bringing you post conferences, bringing you media personnel behind the scenes at Clemson, bringing you now from a fan take. And so we are credential media, but we are also a huge fan, bringing you everything you need to know about Clemson, where it is all sports, all passion, all of the time. Thanks for making Locked On Clemson your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and over on YouTube. And we are part of the amazing Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today is Thursday, July 25th. We've got a great episode for you today, talking about Steve Spurrier opens up on his opinion with Clemson and FSU. Talk about what we need to hear from Clemson today at Media Day, what we want to hear from them, answers to questions. And lastly, we're going to talk about another part of our series, Learn from the Past, where we watch last year's games and talk about what we learned and how can we apply that to this year's team. So going to be a great episode for you. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So we've talked about this a lot, and everyone is talking about this. This is one of the hottest topics in college football, and that is Clemson and FSU and all their court cases, all 5 of them, as well as conference realignment, where they're going to go, where they're going to end up, all that kind of fun stuff. It's a hot topic. It's something that's really big going on right now. We've heard from so many personalities. Journalists have gave their opinions. ESPN's gave their opinion. Reporters have gave their opinion. The commissioners have talked about it. Head coaches have talked about it just a little bit, mainly not really. Now we get to hear from an a legendary coach of a rival of the Clemson Tigers, head coach there for so many years. Steve Spurrier opened up and talked about his opinion on where FSU and Clemson belong. And after walking through, he went on a show and he was talking with a Florida show, a peek inside Florida Gators football podcast. And he made these remarks regarding Clemson and FSU and his take on where they should be. And he said they both belong in none other than the SEC. Steve Spurrier, granted, he's a SEC coach. That's who he was. He coached for South Carolina for many, many years, as well as some other schools. But he says that Clemson and FSU definitely belong in the SEC. They said that it's undoubtedly in the next 2 to 3 years that we'll be in a different conference. Now, granted, Steve Spurrier is a big South Carolina Gamecock fan. Obviously, he coached there. So he's not going to give Clemson a bunch of credit. So he said FSU definitely belongs there. And then the words he said about Clemson was, let's get through this. He said, I think FSU definitely belongs in the SEC, but Clemson sort of belongs there also. All right, backhanded compliment. I like to see it. That what else would you expect from the rivalry? But then he went on and talked about some different details. But according to Steve Spurrier, Clemson and FSU belong in the SEC. And so in order for us to, all right, what are our thoughts on that? We're going to talk about 2 things real quick. We're going to talk about 1, should Clemson join the SEC? And 2, will Clemson join the SEC? And we'll give you our answers. Should Clemson join the SEC? There's many reasons why yes. 1, Clemson needs to play in bigger games. They need that. They need to stop having these conference games that mean a lot to the school but don't mean anything else to the rest of the nation. Those games have got to go away. It isn't good for marketing, isn't good for money, it isn't good for so many different reasons. If they join the SEC, that ends. You then have 8 conference games where you're playing top tier teams every week, and then 4 non-con games that you can schedule whatever you like. So You want to play the best football, you want to compete and prove that you're one of the best in the nation, you got to play the best in the nation on a regular basis. Now, right now, we have a good record against them in recent years, but what does that look like if we played them on a weekly basis? That would be very interesting to see. For that reason, Clemson should join the SEC. Another reason is money. The biggest reason this court case is going on, it stems down to money. Clemson isn't making what they deserve. SEC has agreed with, or ACC has agreed with the ESPN deal that is getting them paid nowhere near what the other conferences are getting paid. Big 12 is comparable, but even the Big 12 is more. And so with that being said, you join the SEC, you're now definitely getting paid some of the highest in all the nation. That would be a huge deal. There's no reason some of the smaller schools at SEC that aren't anywhere near as good as Clemson in majority of sports should be making as much more as they are. For that reason, Clemson should join the SEC. Another one, obviously, when it comes down to it, conferences are changing. Pac-12 is no more. ACC seems to be going away. Or at least very much losing steam, losing prestigeness. Big 12 is on the market. Are they going to get into that top 3 conferences, or are they going to fall back with the ACC? It is a Big 2, Power 2 conferences right now with SEC and Big 10. If Clemson wants to stay top level, without any doubt, they need to get in one of those conferences. They need to be in the top 2 conferences. It's very, very challenging and unrealistic to expect people to see you as one of the nation's best teams, as they are consistently. It's hard for them to see that if you're not in one of the Power 2 conferences. You immediately join one of those conferences, immediately people put more respect on your name. Should that be the case? No, but that's the reality of college football today. So that increases it. And then the lastly is it fits their football style. Clemson plays a style of football that fits the SEC, the talented players, the explosive plays, the hard defense, the talent that's on there. It fits there. So those are reasons why they should. No, and this is the biggest one, if they join the SEC, they definitely are not going to win as many conference champions as they have. Let's pull it down. To win a conference championship in an SEC, you have to have everything go right for you and nothing go right for the other top schools. That's why Georgia and Alabama, 2 of the best football schools in the nation, Georgia's the best one for the past 3 years in the nation, don't have as many conference championships in recent years as Clemson has. It's because they're playing top-tier talent. Clemson has been playing against, let's be honest, outside of 3 or 4 schools, no one to compete against, especially in their top year and their top prime years. So if they join the SEC, they're not going to win as many conference championships. Does that mean less playoffs? No, because you'll be in a Power 2 that'll allow you still to get the playoff spots. But if they're chasing conference championships, and so many coaches have said that conference championship is just as important as the national championship. Kirby Smart from Georgia said that. For that being the case, if you want to win conference championships, SEC is not the place to go. So should Clemson join the SEC? Our take is 100%. Like, if it came down to it and they had the option, I'm not saying they would, but if they got invited, if there was an option for them to join the SEC, they would be very dumb not to take that. So I definitely think they should. Now, will Clemson join the SEC? That one's up in the air. I'm leaning towards no, and here's why. We've talked about this differently. There was a comment on one of our one of our podcasts recently, one of our episodes on YouTube, and they broke it down what we've said over a couple episodes really well, and it's this. Will Clemson join the SEC? It makes sense in one aspect, and it doesn't make sense in another. For the SEC, it makes sense on a football level. You want the you want some of the top teams in the nation. Well, why would you not want a champion that's been the national championship 2 times in the past 10 years, past 8 years, right? You would want that. If you want to be the top football conference, you got to have the best schools. And Clemson, without a doubt, is in that conversation. So you'd want that. It makes sense on the field. It makes sense competitively. Where it doesn't make sense is the market size. South Carolina, University of South Carolina, already has the South Carolina market put. And Clemson is a bigger national school. There are arguments and stats out there that say that South Carolina might be a little bit more popular in the state of South Carolina than Clemson. Clemson's all kind of that northeast region of the state, so it makes sense they pull from other states as well, and nationally they're bigger. But in the state of South Carolina, it's a lot close, and South Carolina's already covering that market. With Florida State, they have the Florida Gators already down there. right? They already have a school down there. Alabama's a rival. Auburn's down there. They have that region covered as well. So when it comes to market, it really doesn't make sense to spend so much money to add those teams to this conference when they already have those markets took care of. So what do they prioritize? Do they prioritize talent and football playing, or do they prioritize reaching where they can, the market availability, all that kind of stuff? So regional aspects, that comes down to where they will. If you hear their commissioner says no. He was quoted by saying 16 teams, which is how many they have right now, is there today, and 16 teams is there tomorrow. With that being the word, Clemson's not joining. But I personally believe he's waiting out. The SEC is waiting out on to see what happens with these court cases. If it gets out and or Clemson gets out how they want to, it's hard for me to believe the SEC wouldn't be opening to add Clemson. Very hard for me to believe that. But it's also they don't want to jump in and be like, oh, yeah, we want them right now, when there could maybe have a chance to never leave the ACC because how much they have to pay. So, and there's a chance they could leave the ACC, but the ACC could still have the rights to show all the games. Then what is Clemson taking to the next conference? So a lot up in the air. Will Clemson join the SEC? I don't think so. I would lean towards no, just because of everything going on, but there's still a chance. So should Clemson? Yes. Will Clemson? Probably not. So that's our take on that. When we come back, this week is ACC Media Week, and finally, the fourth and final day of it is Clemson Days. Today, we are going to hear from Dabo Swinney. We're going to hear from these amazing players from Clemson representing the university. What are some things that we have to find an answer to? What are some things that we definitely need to hear the answer from over this ACC break? We're going to talk about that and more when we come right back after this. MLB is in full swing. Very little is better than a game day at Clemson University. But man, MLB games are right up there with them. I love going to different ballparks and feeling the vibe and the energy of the stadium. And my go-to place for tickets is the Gametime app. Gametime is now an authorized ticket seller for all MLB games, and they're the easiest place to go to for all your ticket needs. Whether it's in advance or the day of, prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it is to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guaranteed, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Braves are in a little slump with some injuries. Padres are fighting for that wild card spot. No matter who your team is, Gametime is the best place for tickets for all MLB teams. Some of my favorite things are I love the fact you get 60% off when you're buying last-minute tickets. I also love the fact that every single seat, you can see a panoramic view before you buy the seat, so you know exactly what to expect. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now on App Store or the Android Play, Google Play Store. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Clemson podcast, where we are covering ACC Media Day down in Charlotte. Great time. It is finally time for Clemson to be there. Monday was exciting, being there, getting able to experience the commissioner, all of that. That was exciting. But now it is Thursday. It is time for Clemson to represent, to show up, and us to be able to hear from Clemson regarding so many different things. And you've got to know it's already been a topic there about some different things going on with topics being brought up. But we wanted to come here and we wanted to talk about some things that we have to hear when it comes to Dabo and Clemson. We have 4 questions that we want to know the answer to, and we would love to hear Dabo say this. We're going to ask if we can. We're going to ask these questions. The first one is this. I simply want to hear Dabo and some players' opinions on the conference realignment. I know they'll probably give some PC political correct answer about how it's we're focused on the game, we're focused on the sport, which honestly, as a fan, you want to hear that because it's like, okay, good, they're focused. But at the same time, as a fan, you're like, no, spill the tea. Let me know your opinion. You know what I mean? Like I want to know, right? But we want to know that. We want to hear Dabo talk about the realignment. What's his focus on? What's his goal? What's his opinion? How involved is he in the decision? We want to hear all of that. You would think Clemson, as a high-level coach they have in Dabo, he'd be a part of almost every decision, but you never know. So I want to know, what is Dabo and the team's opinion on the conference realignment? We know the commissioners. We know Graham Neff's, we've kind of heard it from the president of Clemson, Jim Clemens. What is Dabo's? I want to know his opinion. The second question is this, and this is the rest of them are a little bit more football focused. The next one is this, the transfer forecast. 0 transfers incoming. I'm not going to ask his thoughts on that. I want to ask this question. Very simple question. Is 0 transfers the goal, or are you open to bringing in more? He's talked about how the transfer portal has a couple different kind of guys, the guys that are just out there to seek more, the guys that already know where they're going and that already have deals made before it's open, and the guys that don't fit the culture. If a guy comes around that fits those, or is he opening to bring in transfers, or is he like, no, I'm not utilizing it all. I refuse to utilize it. I want to know where he sits. I know he doesn't have to. He's content with not having any, but is his goal 0, or is his goal maybe 2 or 3 to bring in each year? I want to know where his stance is on that moving forward, looking at future years to see truly where his priority is. So where is your goal? Where's your goal when it comes to transforming or transfers? The next 2 questions are specifically football related this season. Number 1 is this: how much of a focus is freshman involvement? How much is a focus is freshman involvement from Clemson team this year? Last year, freshmen were extremely vital to the team. Brown led the receiving in yards and touchdown, right? You had TJ Parker on the defensive line who did great. Khalil Barnes in the secondary who did great. You had 3 freshmen that were very vital to the team last year. This year, is that going to be the same? Is it still going to be important with Bryant Wesco Jr. or TJ Moore to be able to jump in there and to to get involved early on, to see starts, to see playing time? Or is it just last year due to injuries? On the defensive side, is Sammy Brown? I know he's a backup right now, but is he going to come in and compete with Wade Woodaz? Or he's not going to compete with Barrett Carter, but is he going to compete with the other white linebackers for time? Is he going to be utilized in there a lot? What is the freshman involvement? What level do you want to see the freshmen going to? Because that's important for us to know. It's important for us to see, okay, we've got some exciting wide receivers, and everything says TJ Moore is going to be involved. But Bryant Wesco, how involved is he going to be in? Is he going to be on the field a lot? Are we going to have to wait through the season to see what happens? Are we going to wait for an injury? We're going to have to wait to another year. He's a great recruit. He's got great size. He's got great skill. Are we going to see him? Are we going to see him more and more, or are we going to have to wait a little bit? How much involved is he going to be? Sammy Brown was one of the best recruits that we got this past year. In the 2024 class was the 11th best class in the nation for Clemson. Sammy Brown was a key fixture in that. How important is he going to be? Is he going to be utilized? Are we going to play him, or is this year more of a learn behind Barrett Carter year? I want to see that. I'd love to hear how Dabo is planning on utilizing and implementing the freshmen into the offense this year. So that would be the 3rd question. And the 4th and final question is what is Cade's leash? So Cade Klubnik, obviously last year, gets a lot of the blame when it comes to our disappointing season. My question is this: is he the undoubtedly starter for the season, or is there something that y'all have marked down there? If this happens, we look at CV or we look at Trent Pierman to become in and compete for the QB1. What is that balance? Where is that at? I know he's going to be saying, well, Cade's our Q quarterback. That's where it's at. That's what he's going to say. But when you look at DJU, it's plain to see how that year went on, that he did not have enough faith, or he stayed with DJU way too long to bring in Cade Klubnik. I mean, look at what happened in the ACC championship game. That proves the ACC competition, how DJU was playing that year. Cade Klubnik should have been playing earlier on. Is that the case this year? What if Cade comes out and struggles again? I don't think he is, but what if he does? Is he the starter through the whole season? Or is there a chance that earlier on, if he comes out and is disappointing, throwing interceptions or bad reads, fumbling the ball, leading us to losses, that a QB1 spot opens up for Pierman or CV to start competing against? So I would be interested in that. What's the leash? What's the limit? Where is Cade's line? So those are the questions we'll be asking. We'll be talking about and hearing tomorrow. Make sure you're following along on Twitter. We're going to be tweeting some stuff out. If you're not a part of our subtext, make sure you join our subtext by texting Clemson to 864-252-1907 for our Locked On Clemson inside our program. Make sure you join that. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But that's the questions. We're excited to finally have Clemson at Media Day to kick off the 2024-2025 season. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to keep up our Learn from the Past series, where we learn from past games last year and how can we apply them to this year's teams. We'll talk about that and more in just a second. Welcome back to the Locked On Clemson podcast. Hey, thanks for joining us. And so we're in the middle of this series where we're going through and we watch every single game in order from last season. We have watched 8 so far. Today we're going to jump into our 9th game, and this was the start of a very important run for our team last year. Last year, this is the Notre Dame game. We entered this game 4-4 going into, or we entered this game with 4 losses. Very important win this game. This game provided a crucial win, and it started a 5-game win streak that Clemson would end the year on, including that bowl game against Kentucky. So they had a great game against Notre Dame. What this game showed us was this. It provided us with how the dirt raid can be successful. We talked about in yesterday's episode how the dirt raid, Dabo Swinney and Garrett Riley, their coined term for how it's not an air raid, it's a dirt raid, how that can be successful, how running the ball can open pass game, which can open running game, how that can be successful. We saw that for perhaps the first time last year in this game. Granted, it was only the first half, but we saw that. The run game was amazing. Phil Maffa started the game with like a 50-yard touchdown. It was huge. He played excellent. He ran the ball really well. Our offensive line let him run well. So Cade Klubnik, that opened up the pass game. He made some great throws. He made a couple that were completions. That was a dumb throw, but it worked out. But our rush game was successful, which led to our pass game being successful, which led to our rush game again with Phil Maffa rushing a lot in the second half. This game provided that dirt raid can be successful. Now, granted, the second half was a completely different game for our offense. We scored 24 points in the first quarter, or in the first half, scored 7 points in the third quarter and 0 in the fourth. So it definitely slowed down in the second half. It looked like a different offense out there, but the first half proved this dirt raid can be successful. This concept of the dirt raid can be extremely successful. Then obviously the slow second half led to Notre Dame's offense kicking into the second half because their defense was out there more. In the first half, they scored 6 points. In the second half, they scored 17 points. All of those were in the third quarter. It was a 0-0 tie in the fourth quarter. But Clemson did up winning this game 31-23. And when you look at the stats, let's go through those. Order of scoring, Notre Dame scored a field goal right off the bat, took a 3-0 lead, followed by Phil Maffa, a 41-yard touchdown run. Jonathan White hit a field goal, go up 10-3 in the first quarter. In the second quarter, Notre Dame hit a field goal early to make it 10-6. And then two touchdowns in a row by Clemson, a 9-yard pass from Cade Klubnik to Tyler Brown. And then 40 seconds later on the game clock, Jeremiah Trotter had a 28-yard pick six return touchdown. Exciting to see. And then late in the third quarter or second quarter, Notre Dame kicked a field goal to go into halftime 24-9. Third quarter, Notre Dame scored like we talked about twice. They had a touchdown early on, 1 minute and 3 seconds into the half. Clemson followed that up with a long drive with Phil Maffa scoring, and then they followed that up with a really quick 26-yard touchdown run by Sam Hartman for the last score of the day. Clemson would win 31-23, and this was a big win. Going into this game, Clemson was obviously 4-4. They weren't ranked, obviously. Notre Dame was 7-2, ranked 15th in the nation. Clemson was a big underdog here. It was a big game for them, but they stepped up, they showed their potential, and they used the dirt raid to success. With the stats looking at it, for Notre Dame, Sam Hartman had not a Sam Hartman day from last year. He went 13 for 30, 146 yards with 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns. Rushing the ball, they had 2 running backs go really well. Audric Estem and Sam Hartman, both. I know Sam Hartman's a quarterback, but he had a great day running as well. Audric had 17 carries for 87 yards, 1 touchdown. Hartman had 7 rushes, 68 yards, 1 touchdown. Receiving, they didn't have anyone over 40 yards. Obviously, no touchdowns no passing touchdowns. They had 2 fumbles, they had 1 fumble. They lost it. They did recover 1 fumble as well. And then defensively, they had a decent game. Nothing huge, nothing big. Only had 1 sack on the game, 5 tackles for a loss. Clemson, on the other hand, Cade Klubnik had, again, not so great of a game, but we were used to seeing that. But he started off hot. He played really well in the first half, which is where most of these yards came from. He had 13 for 26 for only 109 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Phil Maffa went off. I mean, he had an excellent game. He had 36 carries for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 5 yards per carry on the day. He had a great game. Great game. Dominique Thomas saw a couple carries. He had 3 carries for 16 yards. Cade Klubnik, 3 carries, negative 11 yards. Love to see it. Love to see it. We saw that a lot last year. Yeah, but in the overall, we passed for 109 yards, ran for 176. It's pretty bad when Phil Maffa had 186 yards, and because his quarterback, our total rushing yards were less than what he had. Yes, please do that more. But going to the receivings, again, we had no receivers with over 40 yards. We only had 1 over 30, where Notre Dame had 3. Bo Collins was our leading receiver of the day, 3 receptions, 37 yards. Tyler Brown only had 1 reception for 9 yards, but it was a touchdown. No other big players. Jake Brennan had a quiet day, 2 receptions, 13 yards. Phil Maffa did fumble the ball twice, which you hate to see. He lost one of those. We recovered one of those. And then Philip Lorenzo was our defensive player that recovered the fumble. On the defensive side, our biggest, Jeremiah Trotter, definitely had the best game. This was perhaps his best game of the season. Had 11 total tackles, 7 solo, 2 sacks, 2.5 tackles for a loss, 1 pick six. He had a great game on the game overall. Played really, really well. Kylan Griffin also had an interception for Clemson, returned it for 15 yards. That was a great game overall. So those were the stats. Those are the breakdowns. And like we said, what can we learn from this game? One more time, we learned that we can truly trust when Dabo and Garrett Riley talk about the dirt raid, we can trust that that could be successful. They're not just blowing smoke. They're not just making something up. This game proved that if they can get the players to play right, if they can get the offensive line, if they can get the play calls, if the rushing game can open, then truly we could have a dirt raid offense. What we talked about yesterday, if you want to see all the dirt raid that we were talking about, the benefit of rushing well, throwing well, rushing well, and that benefit of it, or if you want to say the negative of it, bad rushing, bad passing, bad rushing, this game is perfect. Watch the first half for a successful dirt raid. Watch the second half or not so much. So that's what we learned. We learned the dirt raid can and will be successful in 2024 because we're seeing improvements at every level. And so with that being said, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Clemson podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Later this week, tomorrow, we're going to talk about more football stuff. And next week is the week of guests. We've got a bunch of special guests waiting for us next week on a couple great episodes. But hey, before we jump in this, we want to let you know again, we want to invite you to become an insider member of the Locked On Clemson podcast by joining our insider program. What that does is it creates one-on-one conversations with you and me where you can message me at any point, creates more of a conversation between us on game days as games start happening. But we also have bonus video episodes only for our insider programs, such as film studies, breaking down your questions, mailbag episodes, all of that kind of stuff. So to join that program, text Clemson to 864-252-1907. You get 14 days for free to try it out and then on a free trial. But let us know your thoughts on today's topic. Hit us up on Twitter, drop a comment on YouTube, or join Subtext and join that insider program and send us a message. But we'd love to hear what we talked about. If you haven't, make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you hear your podcast at and over on YouTube. That way, every single day, we are so grateful for our everydayers that their first listen is here on the Locked On Clemson podcast. Make sure you check out other podcasts, one of the 200 other shows that Locked On Podcast provides, where it is your team every day. We can't wait to see you on tomorrow's episode, but until then, you keep that Tiger pride alive and roaring. Right there in the back, it says it right there. Keep that Tiger pride alive and roaring, and guess what? Go Tigers.